Hi, everybody. Welcome to Brockton Writers Series. I'm so glad you could be with us tonight. As usual, we'll start off with the land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge that the Brockton organizers at this time do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And we acknowledge the ways that colonization, genocide, and racism have impacted Indigenous peoples, and that settlers like myself, like some of us, have a responsibility for making space at events like these for Indigenous voices. We all share the responsibility to critically understand and challenge forces of systemic oppression. For many of us, this includes recognizing how our ancestors of settlers have contributed to colonial legacies. And it also means writing to your elected officials today, these days, and asking them to take action, such as reporting back on progress they've made with the recommendations listed in the TRC, to stop harassing land defenders, to deal with the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the foster system, and many, many other injustices. We'd also like to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to feature and center Black and Indigenous voices, other people of color, and other underrepresented groups, and all of this is included in our mandate. Thank you very much for joining us on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. It really does help. I always hear my kids' YouTube gamer bros saying like and subscribe, and now I understand why. It really helps if you like and subscribe. Today's lineup will include a guest speaker, a Q&A for the speaker, and then our 4 readers, followed by a group Q&A for them as well. We're not going to have a break now that we are online. Please type your questions into the YouTube chat box. Please do that as they occur to you. There's a little bit of a time lag, so waiting till the end isn't the best idea. If you have an idea for a question, just stick it in right in there and we'll get it. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to Emily.
Brockton Writers Series was founded in November 2009, which means we've been active in the Toronto literary scene for over a decade now. Our Brockton Writers Series volunteers are Jen Albert, Hannah Amdemichael, Nancy K. Clark, Dorianne Emerton, Sonia Patare, and I'm Emily Sanford, and we have the pleasure of working together to keep the Brockton Writers Series going. If you would like to join the team, please check in with us after the readings, put a note in the chat, reach out. We would love to hear from you. We would like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council who make this series possible. And we would also like to thank the brilliant team of designers who participated in the Association for Registered Graphic Designers not-for-profit Design-a-thon earlier this month to come up with some new branding for Brockton Writers Series. We'll be rolling it out over the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight. Now on to Brockton's guest speaker. Emmy holds a PhD in justice-oriented social work. In 2019, they made a lateral career move into publishing after 4 years as a bookseller at a local indie, and they now work as a literary agent at Westwood Creative Artists. Emmy lives with their partner, a deaf Dalmatian, and 2 formerly feral Maine Coon cats. Welcome, Emmy.
Thank you so much. And one of my cats is currently making his way over to make himself known, so everyone might get to meet him tonight. It's hard to say. It's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I'm really, really looking forward to the readings later on. And I have prepared altogether too much information to fit into the allotted time for speaking. So I'll try and keep things as brief as possible. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. I'm just going to wiggle a few things over. This way you won't have to look at me and my digital background the whole time that I'm speaking. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about agents and CanLit. I know that a lot of writers watch this series and a lot of emerging writers who are maybe weighing their options for how to best move forward in their writing career. And the agenting landscape is a little bit different, much like most things in publishing for Canadians, than it is for American authors. And so I thought that it might be a good topic to just start out with a bit of a 101 about what agenting is, how to find the best agent for you, and also where to start looking, because it can be a really super daunting task. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to talk about. And I am just going to minimize. There we go. Now I can see my own screen. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about me and what an agent does. So what I do on the day-to-day in my agenting job. So my name is Emmy. I came into publishing from bookselling. Like Emily said, I used to work at another storybook shop in Roncesvalles in Toronto. It is pretty much my favorite place on earth. I recommend to everybody that you check it out if you haven't before, and if you're local or if you're visiting. I was working on my PhD at the time that I started working at the bookshop, and I started thinking to myself what I might like to do when I was finished. And I wasn't really ready to jump into the academic life, so I decided to look at options within publishing. And one of the things that came up for me when I was doing research was literary agenting, but much like a lot of authors, I really had no idea what that meant. And so I did a whole bunch of research. I talked to a lot of agents who I connected with mostly through social media to find out kind of what their day-to-day work looked like. And here I am. So I spend most of my days, I spend a lot of time talking on the phone to editors. We do a lot of building social networks with editors and other professionals in the field, like film agents or publishers, all those kinds of people. And the rest of my time I spend working with my clients. So that can take two forms. One is working directly with my clients on their actual projects. And then the other thing that I do spend a lot of my time on is negotiating contracts and doing like financial paperworky kind of things in the background. So I spend a lot of my life with spreadsheets. So the first thing I want to talk about is that agents aren't necessarily going to be the right fit for everyone. And not only are all agents individually different, but I'm a firm believer that there is a very varied and diverse ecosystem within publishing, and that agent representation isn't even for everyone, just on the whole. And I don't think that that's more true anywhere than in Canada, because we have such a diverse and vibrant literary community across this country and so many different options for authors that sometimes working with a literary agent can be awesome, and sometimes it can really just hold people back or maybe impede them from achieving the goals that they really want to achieve. So one of the great things about Canada is that we have fantastic independent publishers in this country, and a lot of authors will have access to submission to those independent publishers without the support of an agent. And that can be a great way to build a thriving literary career in Canada, and also can open up opportunities internationally as well. So in terms of the options here, I think that we're very, very lucky in Canada to have the infrastructure that we have, as well as the funding structure that we have. And so some authors, they're going to find that their books are a great fit for traditional publishing, and that's great. And agents can give you access to some of the publishers that you might not otherwise have access to. They will sell your work to editors and to larger publishing houses, advocate for you and for your rights, make sure you get the most beneficial, fair contracts you possibly can. They'll give you professional industry advice and insight. And the part I think that most of my clients feel a real sense of relief about is getting the back end support around contracts, financial documentation, taxes, all of that stuff that agents are able to offer. Because we work with such a large number of clients on the day-to-day, it becomes pretty routine for us, whereas that sort of skill set can be a bit daunting for a lot of folks in creative professions. But that said, you have to find the right agent who's the right fit for you and your process. And there are some drawbacks as well. For example, your work is not going to represent just you anymore, but it also represents your agent and your agency. So before it goes out on submission, it does mean that you need sort of a couple of different layers of approval that you might not have otherwise needed. You may have to compromise more and have less control over some of the smaller aspects, or sometimes larger aspects, depending on what publishers you're aiming for of your work and of your story. You do have to pay a commission on your acquisitions, which, depending on how big your advance is or how large your royalty payments are, can be really cumbersome for some authors, especially those who are just building their careers. And some books just aren't going to be the right fit for traditional publishing. So if that's you, it's totally fair and fine to want to pursue other paths. And I think that there's sort of this idea that having an agent is like the holy grail of your writing career, and that's just not true for everybody. So I think that there are lots of paths to pursue. And even as an agent myself, I don't know that agents are going to be the right fit for everybody. But if you do decide that you want to look for an agent, it becomes kind of a daunting task. And so I hope that I can give a little bit of information, a bit of a peek behind the curtain as to how to start that search. That's a question I get all the time, is how do you find out where to find a good agent? How do you find the agent that's right for you? How do you find out information about agents? So there are I've tried to break this into two categories, so Canadian agents and international agents. And there are sort of three main places that I would suggest as a starting point for a search. One is PACLA or AALA. Those are the organizations in Canada and the US respectively that sort of hold accountable agents in the profession and hold them to a certain standard, allow them to share resources, all of that kind of stuff. And they can usually direct you in terms of who their membership is, as to who is most involved in the literary community and who has the right experience to be able to give you really, really great advice during your career. So those are great places to start. Also, if you have access to Publishers Marketplace, I'll show you some screenshots in just a minute, but you can see lists of sort of the highest performing agents and agencies in terms of their sales. And then there's also a manuscript wish list websites. There are a couple of primary ones. If you just Google the phrase manuscript wish list, you'll find them. Most of them list editors and agents, so just be careful that you're looking at the right person. And I would say to always double check what you find on those websites with what people are posting on social media or on their own websites or on their agency's websites, to make sure that the information that you find is up to date. So in Canada, and this isn't a full list of all the agencies in Canada, but it is the ones that are the largest in terms of the numbers of agents that are involved, and also in terms of the volume of sales that they do, both in Canada and internationally. There are a number of literary agencies that are well established and have been around for a long time: Cook McDermott, PS Literary, Transatlantic, The Rights Factory, and Westwood Creative Artists. All of the agencies have agents all over Canada, and some of them also have agents that are based in the United States. So if you're looking for a particular agent within a particular region, just be careful that you're looking at the right people and that you check with them to see where they're based, if that matters to you. And the biggest thing I would say is not so much where people live, but their awareness of things that are a little bit different in Canada than they are in the US. So make sure that they're aware of Canadian imprints and independent publishers, but also things like the library credit that they may not have access to in the US. So if you're a Canadian author, you want to be able to take advantage of local awards and funding opportunities, and you want to make sure that your agent is well versed in those kind of more unique aspects of the literary landscape here. These are the screenshots that I was talking about. And I find that Publishers Marketplace can be a good place to start if you are looking more broadly at agents, because there are hundreds, as you can see from these lists. And Publishers Marketplace can give you an idea of how many deals an agent typically does in a year, in a 6-month period, as well as like how that fits into their agency overall. So if they're a bigger agency that has, dozens of agents and does hundreds of deals every year, that's going to be a different experience for their clients than for example, where I work, where there are like 15 of us and we all have relatively small lists and we're all relatively hands-on, I would say, with our clients because of that. So these can be great lists to kind of get a sense of what sort of approach agencies and various agents take. And if you can get access to the site, it can be a great source of information, even though it can be a little overwhelming to learn how to parse. But there are lots of other great places to find agents too. And a lot of them cost a lot less than Publishers Marketplace does. So I always encourage people, if you can, to check out workshops and conferences, ask about scholarship opportunities. There are lots of smaller conferences online where you'll get to have really cool one-on-one experiences with agents that you might not get at bigger conferences. There are also Twitter pitch parties. If you again, search for a list of Twitter pitch parties, you'll find ones that are genre specific. You'll find ones that are more broad. I personally only do 1 or 2 a year because I find them to be very overwhelming, but lots of people have so much fun and get great experience pitching their books through social media. In-person and online book launches and events is another place. So if you really admire an author and you want to meet their agent, sometimes that's a great way to do it, as long as you are polite and respectful of their boundaries at those events. The same thing with festivals. There are lots of local agents who attend lots of local festivals. And since so many of them are online right now, you might consider checking out like vendor areas and things like that too, because a lot of times literary agencies will have tables in expositions and things like that. Obviously, also through critique partners, beta readers, other industry reps. So if you have other writer friends, ask around. Especially in Canada, the community is small. People usually know lots of people. And if you have questions, that can be a great way to get them answered. And last but not least, I would also consider checking out podcasts. I actually got into agenting from listening to a podcast episode that was all about agenting and the skills required. And it seemed to line up really well with what I wanted and what I had to offer to the industry. And one that I find really, really helpful is The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which is a Canadian production. It's hosted by Bianca Beret, who's a Canadian author. And there are two Canadian agents, both from PS Literary, Carly Waters and Cece Lira, who appear regularly on the podcast and do things like query critiques. And they are not only hilarious and very, very smart, but they offer great insight as to, like who is available and open to queries and all of that sort of thing. So it can be a great place to hear about agents, connect with them. And they also do live critique events and things like that, where you can actually meet agents and get to develop a relationship with them. So this is, last but not least, when you do find an agent that you're interested in working with, then we begin the query process. And I'm going to pause right here because I realize I've been talking basically consistently, and just say that I'm happy to answer questions after I'm done with my info dump here. And they can be about anything related to agenting. So feel free to drop those in the chat, and I will get to those in just a few minutes. Anything industry related or agenting related, I'm happy to speak to. And I'll just hop back in. So querying is its own sort of animal. And so these are very, very basic suggestions about how to approach querying an agent. I would definitely, the biggest thing is do your research, do lots and lots of Googling, listen to podcasts, attend events, talk to your writer friends, do all the things before you start querying, because the more that you do, the more your expectations will be realistic about how challenging the process can be, and also what to expect, because it's not always as straightforward as you might think. Make sure that your query letter is written to industry standards. There is a format that most agents prefer to receive their queries in. It's a 3-paragraph format. It's not a super big project, but it is sort of a tricky psychological project, I would say. It takes a lot of mental energy. So there are lots of resources online as to how to really nail that, and make sure you have people read it over before you send it out. Follow submission guidelines as closely as possible. So do make sure that you check agency websites and particular agents' individual submission guidelines when they have them. As much as you're able to follow those guidelines, it enables agents to get through very cumbersome query piles quickly, and also really identify the people that they think they might work best with. You can query multiple agents at once. You don't need to go one at a time. It can take a very, very long time. I know that personally in the last year, I've gotten super backed up with my own queries, so I can speak to that from firsthand experience. But the biggest thing is, if you get an offer of representation, make sure you let everyone who you sent your query to know, either so that they can prioritize you and compete for the opportunity to represent you, or so that you can move on with your choice and know that you are free and clear, and that nobody is going to waste time reading a query that they don't need to consider anymore. On the flip side of that, make sure that you give agents time to consider. A lot of agency websites will give you a window that they suggest that you wait before you follow up, or a window that is sort of like it takes us 18 weeks to get back to queries, that kind of thing. So it is a slow process, and try to be as patient as you can. And during the process, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think lots of agents are very interested in supporting authors in their search for the right agent, and making sure that you have the right personality fit is just as important as finding the person who has the professional qualifications to take you on. So don't be afraid to really dig in and ask for all the information that you need while you're making your choice. That was a lot of information very quickly, and I'm so sorry. But we have
Thank
lots
you
of
so
time
much.
for a Q&A.
Thank you so much, Emmy. That's amazing. So we do have a few questions that I'm going to put to you that have come in from the chat. So the
Yeah.
first one is, what's on your manuscript wish list?
Oh my gosh, mine is horrible. I feel like I get asked that question all the time. I have a very detailed manuscript wish list. I love to fine tune it. But I would say that it's not necessarily as specific as some people's. I tend to look for, one of the things that I'm really, really lucky to have at Westwood is a lot of freedom to take on. So I represent authors that write across age categories and genres, which is awesome because it means that whatever I feel super, super excited about, I can pursue, but it's also makes it a little more difficult for authors to know whether they're targeting their query right. But I love to be surprised. So I do have a manuscript wish list. It's I have a personal website that's emmy.oo, and if you go there, or Westwood, you can find the link to my way too detailed wish list and also submission guidelines. Right now, I'm only accepting nonfiction queries because, as I already owned up to, I have a huge backlog. I've been very lucky to have extremely enthusiastic clients. So I try not to take anybody on when I don't have capacity, obviously, to support them properly. So
That's great.
So yeah,
and
right now.
we've just shared your list in the chat too.
Oh, awesome.
Folks.
Thank
So,
you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So the next one is, what's your number one tip for queries?
Oh gosh, patience. I feel like I spend so much time talking to my clients and also querying authors. It's publishing moves. I don't know that I even would have believed that it could move as slowly as it does. It's a very slow process. It takes so long to read things, but also just the volume of queries that people get is massive. I think that the last time that I was fully open for queries, I was getting between 30 and 40 a week, and that was like not nearly as high as some of my colleagues. So definitely it takes some time, and yeah, I think that following that query format and adhering to submission guidelines can be really, really helpful and give you a huge advantage, because the less that agents have to kind of like piece together what it is you're trying to communicate to them, the faster they'll be able to read your query and understand your message and get to the good part, which is reading your writing sample. So the more that people can follow those guidelines, the more helpful it really makes a huge difference in our lives.
Awesome. Okay, so sort of tied to that, is there a standard for how long the agents take to get back to writers who submit work, or is there do any offer any suggestions as to why they were rejected?
So like yes and no. So for my agency, we had to implement a policy where we only respond to authors who are like quote unquote successful, which basically means that if the query is passed on without a full request, authors generally don't get a response. And that was just because it was taking us like so much time to respond to all of our queries that it just becomes like totally unsustainable. You just end up getting through none of them. So the guidelines for Westwood are essentially that we have like a 12-week window. And if people hear nothing back after that 12 weeks, they can sort of assume that at least the agent that they queried has passed, and they're free to move on. And they can, and generally speaking, the etiquette is to only query one agent per agency at a time. And so at that time, like if people want to query other agents within the agency as well, like that's also totally fine. Sometimes more than one person would be a right fit, even though they work at the same place. So that's something that everybody is totally comfortable with. So the trick really comes when people give a full request. I always warn people that it takes me a long time to get to fulls. And it's because like we don't have time during the day to sit and read manuscripts that aren't for clients. So I spend a lot of time listening to full manuscripts, like when I'm driving or like in the bath or like wherever people read, like I'm like waiting for pancakes to cook, I'll be reading sometimes. But I also really want to be able to like pay attention to what I'm reading and focus on it. And so it does take me a little bit of time. But at that point, people have received like a personal email from me, and the communication channels are open. So I always hope that people feel comfortable to follow up. And I don't mind nudges because it does take me a while. And then the other part of that is that at that point, I always give feedback on my queries. So if I've taken the time to like invest in reading like a more substantial portion of your work, I always take the time to get back to people and try to at least give some kind of feedback, because if they've been patient with me up until that point, I really want to make sure that they get something out of the experience rather than just, frustration with me. So,
Oh, that's
yeah,
really
I try
good to
to.
know.
Yeah.
Good to know. I heard a little while ago, many years ago, that in general in Canada, poets there's not really an agency mechanism for poetry. Has that changed, or is it still
Not
the
really.
case?
So, I mean, if you're a poet who's also doing other things, of course, yeah, like definitely you can be a poet and also be writing prose and be represented for that. But in general, I would say like a lot of the poetry publishers prefer to work directly with poets. And there's sort of two reasons for that. One is that like even with government support and things like that, a lot of publishers for poetry don't expect huge returns on a book. And so they want to be able to invest in it, but they also like if you're losing 15 or 20% of the amount that they're going to pay you for that book on your agency fees, like really is like what's the benefit, like it's hard for the publisher and it's also hard for the author. And then also to have like a hardball agent come in and try and like negotiate you better terms when there's already like so little in terms of resources for poetry is like really just more annoying than anything, I would say. But also like more than that, I think that aside from the contracts, I think that in some ways it does make sense because they are shorter works. So, like having a third person involved, sometimes it's just more kind of red tape than it's worth. Yeah, I wish that wasn't the case because I love poetry and I do actually represent a few people who also write poetry, but I just represent them for their books. So when they're done with their poetry stuff, they send it to me and I get to read it like a normal reader, which is awesome. But no, definitely I think that on the whole, like there are definitely exceptions. I won't say that it never happens, but I would say on the whole, it's still kind of the Wild West out there for poets.
All right, so that's all I see right now. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Emmy? It's been so wonderful. Oh, we want, please share with us a recent client success.
Oh, I mean, I'll share one that's like very Canadian because I'm super excited about it. Lydia Kwa, who's an author of mine who lives out on the West Coast, she came to me, and sometimes I think one of the things I find people think of agents a lot is that we're only in it for like these big fancy deals and for the money and stuff. And like, at least for me, that's very not true. I like publishing is capitalism all the way down, but I always try to sort of focus on what the author wants for their work and for their project. And she came to me with this beautiful speculative novel that is, I was like, I don't know if we're going to find a Canadian publisher for this because there just aren't the number of options in Canada as there are in the US. And so we were really strategic and we were really hopeful, and we sent it out and we found a great home for it with Wilsek and Wynn. And so we're thrilled. I'm super proud of her. It's a beautiful book and I can't wait to see it out in the world. So it's very Larissa Lai referential, I think. So for people who have loved her work as much as I have, I hope that they'll like Lydia's new book just as much.
That is so wonderful. I love it. Thank you so much. Any last minute questions for Emmy before we move along? No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Emmy. That's a wonderful package of information.
I'm sorry for blasting through it like that.
You did amazing.
Well, at least it's on YouTube so people can rewatch it if they couldn't digest my like stream of consciousness. So thank you so much.
It's 7 o'clock, so we're right on time. So
Awesome.
I think you did wonderfully. That was an incredible amount of information. I'm like storing it away, even though I'm also tweeting as new people come on, making notes, including to that last author you mentioned, because I love Lures Alive. So I'm very excited to read this book. So I'm going to interject here and say, now that we have our own YouTube channel, we need to make it official. So we need you to subscribe. I already mentioned that, but it's worth mentioning again. And also that we would be greatly benefited if you would like to donate to us. In the before times when we would meet at Glad Day, we would hand around our picture and people would throw in their toonies. And it really helps us because we want to pay our writers and our guest speakers fairly. In these times, we've set up a PayPal account, so that will appear in the chat. And if you are able to spare a few dollars, spare a few cents, just throw some money our way, we can promise it all goes back into this like rich literary community that we're so happy to be a part of. We also value your opinion, so we'd like you to take our survey to suggest topics for future guest speakers. And if you want to suggest like authors that you'd really like us to have on here, like we want to hear from you. So we will also be putting the survey out there. And now, on to the readers. James Lee Lord Parker is a Scarborough singer-songwriter and one half of the pop duo Keep in Touch. His poetry has appeared in Sewerlid and Scarborough Fair, as well as the Canadian anthologies Release Any Words Stuck Inside You Too and Feelways. His debut AP, Scrapbook 1, can be found on all streaming platforms. Take it away, James.
Thank you so much. I need to preface by saying, unlike Emmy, I'm in poetry exclusively for the money. Dollar bills, y'all. You know how it is for poetry. It's seriously such a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to be reading. And I even have a timer to make sure I don't ramble on for too long. The first poem, oh, do I have a timer? Maybe. The answer is probably, and it's starting right now. My poems. For those of you joining in now, 30% of you aren't subscribed to the channel. So please do so now. These statistics are made up, but I assume they're real. So please subscribe. It would be a wonderful service for these wonderful people here. All right, I should get started on some poetry because that's what I'm here to do. This first poem is called I Don't Write Love Poems. And it goes like this. I don't write love poems, or when I do, they're written after we've broken up and you've already rear-ended my heart with that fucker Daryl's Hyundai. I don't write love poems because your love is a tightrope and my body is a bag of paint waiting to slip and splatter on the ground and take its place as Jackson Pollock's Idiot on Concrete number 62. I don't write love poems because when I'm with you, I'm only thinking of the present. I'm not thinking of our first kiss in that crowded A&W. I'm thinking of our next kiss. I'm not thinking of that time I held you down and made raccoon noises so you'd be calm enough for the doctor to hook up your IV. I'm thinking of the next time I'll get to hold you that close. I'm not thinking of that time you did that thing with your hands. My whole body vibrated like a hummingbird on a nicotine high. Well, I am thinking about that one. That some memories are sweet like butterscotch and sick to the roof of your mouth. I don't write love poems because my love is monochrome and all I ever write has to do with stars. But my heartbreak changes faces daily. My heartbreak is jealous. My heartbreak blasts Nirvana through a laptop speaker at 3 a.m. My heartbreak is a swarm of wasps tearing at my throat that come through the phone sounding like I should have been better. Thank you. I'm going to put on my glasses because it is very hard to read. Wonderful. So that one was called I Don't Write Love Poems. And so, of course, this next one is a love poem because I'm nothing if not inconsistent. This is called Don't Confess to Your Bumble Date the First Time You Meet Her. So like, I think what I meant when I told you I love you was, here is this basket of bees with a wing clipped off each one. And if that's too much, take my dad's old cracked coffee mug and store it somewhere. When my dad passed away, he was so small in his hospital bed, and later when he was cremated, so big. When I picked up the urn carrying his ashes, the same ashes I wear around my neck, the same ashes that taught me how to swim and swung me through the air and buried me neck deep in sand, I wondered if my dad would be more at home, shot put into the sea as a farewell cannonball. And somewhere in that story is what I call love. And I know I've totally neglected the bees in this ongoing circus fire, trying to make you understand in the sketchy A&W what I mean when I say I love you. And I know the blinking ice cream machine and the drunk dude pissing in the corner of the room yelling about cannibalism isn't really setting the mood. But so often I try to take back, wait and hoard and pace my apartment in hopes I didn't fuck everything up. So when I say I want you to have this basket of bees, what I mean is, here is my everything. Thank you. And now for something completely different. I always find I'm better at being funny when I'm not supposed to, which is why I'm terrible at stand-up, and you shouldn't invite me to funerals. This next poem is called And Etc. And it's about, to preface, as a kid, I was diagnosed with something called ARVC, which is called arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, which is a very big word for a kid to learn. But what it means is there's too much fatty tissue on the right side of my heart, which means that sometimes the electrical signals can't go to my heart, which could lead to fainting or something worse. And it kind of reshaped my life in a lot of ways. But I'm also really grateful for it because it's what led me to poetry and to arts in general. So mixed bag. And this poem is a little bit about what that was like. At 16 years old, the doctor sat me down in a swivel chair and told me my heart was no good. They tore into my chest until their gloves were pungent and red and their brows thick with sweat. They told me there was nothing they could do, and so there was nothing I could do. But wait, until my heart gave out. I decided then I'd siphon what was owed to me until my lips turned blue or my stomach caught fire. So I did drugs, and I drank, and I threw up on bartenders and bouncers, and I slept. And every day I woke was a day they didn't take from me. The days that vanished turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and by then I understood that the doctors hadn't stolen anything that wasn't already missing. Instead, they planted hunger in my chest and sewed the lips shut. For 2 years, whenever my scar ached and my skin would salivate, I ate for the both of us, till the gurney wheeled me into the ER, and I knew then that I could live to be 100 and my hunger would still press itself against my rib cage and pry open bony bars. That my hunger hates itself more than me. It's been 7 years since then, and every day my hunger still reaches out for gunpowder and matches. My scars have blanched and hardened shut. Thank you. I like following up more serious poems with very silly poems because I'm uncomfortable with feelings. So this is a poem dedicated to my mom, and it's called Superheroes. I wrote this a week ago, so this is the very first draft of it. It will definitely change significantly, but it's fun. My mom is Batman, and while the petite frame, pixie cut, and trademark alpaca socks may not evoke visions of Caped Crusader, I know this in my heart to be true. 1. Batman is a woman. Female bats brave the sky on moonlit nights, foraging for their young, unabashed by predators. Male bats peruse their man caves and debate which Joe Rogan podcast episode is best, I assume. 2. Batman is not a billionaire. This is fiction. Vigilantism is not tax deductible and thusly does not allow the wealthy to pat their backs and line their pockets. My mother graduated from Western with a law degree, but chose to work in legislature, swooping in to protect students from predatory teachers. 3. Batman uses a utility belt. My mother is a utility belt. Daily, she repels silver-tongued, toothy-jawed telemarketers, scans grocery pamphlets for the best deals on lean meats, and was always home in time for Saturday morning cartoons. When her husband, mother, and aunt fell ill simultaneously, she was their safety net, their schedule, their salve, and clung to her smile like their lives depended on it. 4. Batman's greatest villain is the Joker. My mother has dealt with clowns all her life. Her first professor at law school complained about the number of women that were being let in nowadays. My mother's success is the giant middle finger projected in the sky. 5. The elephant in the room. I have not seen my mother, Batman, together in the same room at the same time. But each morning, I wake to find her striking the keys of her laptop with dexterous precision and eyes more tired than when I tucked her in the night before. Thank you. And that's about 10 minutes, so I think I'll call it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James. Wow, that's a lot of really wonderful images all at once, and that's, yeah. Thank you. Next, we have Grace Lau, who is a Hong Kong-born Chinese-Canadian settler living in Ontario in the traditional treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, now known as the Chippewa Tri-Council, comprised of Beausoleil First Nation, Rama First Nation, and the Georgina Island First Nation. Her debut collection of poetry, The Language We Were Never Taught to Speak, is published by Guernica Editions. Her work is published or forthcoming in Grain Magazine, Contemporary Verse 2, Frontier Poetry, Arc Poetry, and elsewhere. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you. Man, I don't have to follow that up. I'm still stuck on your first poem, James. I don't even like butterscotch. Man, like, I don't even like it, but that image it stuck with me. No pun intended. I'm gonna read a few poems from my debut collection, which Emily just talked about, and I'm going to follow up with some more recent poems that I wrote during the pandemic, which was super fun. The first poem is called How to Get Over the Fear of Public Speaking. My father is a good Christian man who speaks with the kind of grace that can rouse 300 souls, even during the pauses, even as he's taking a breath. Cantonese slips on eloquence like a cheongsam dress as it leaves his tongue. Have you ever seen a congregation inhale as one, straighten its shoulders like an orchestra brought to attention? My father has a voice like a train rushing headlong over the tracks near our church. My father's voice was made for the gavel. My father's voice gathers clouds. Be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. When I was a child, my father and I fought, and my voice would cower. Play Peter. Deny me, though it loved me. My voice would get lost never find its way out of the safety of my lips. My voice was not made for war. It had the shakes and a fear of crowds. Now, when I call upon my voice, I tell it this: let them hear me. I am my father's daughter. Thank you. And because of all the love poems, I had to read a love poem, I'm sorry. This one is called At Your Best. It is Friday night and we are at home on the couch. Your head on my shoulder, a well-worn path. This is not the first time you have slowed my hours, and yet how the seconds gasp to be doing nothing at all, but feeling the universe wax content in your breath. It is Saturday night, and we've left our other lovers in a lullaby moon that croons beneath a dusty frame like a memory of the sun that offers no warmth. There is only the green of your eyes, ringed with gold, as clear as a summer stream, and I feel as if I will never thirst again. It is Sunday morning. The spell remains unbroken. I trace you in what's left of stardust. Another leaf has burst forth from our English ivy. I can't remember when I gave the sun back his hours, but now I am at peace with the world and its unloveliness. Yes, I think I would be happy doing this every night of my life. Thank you. This next poem is called The Lies That Bind. We don't know how old Grandma is. She stole a few extra years in Toisan to work in Hong Kong, an early birthday gift for a hungry house. Now her age is another secret with no answer, like what's really in her delicious jellyfish sauce and why I have never brought a boy home. A grandmother's tongue bends time, stretches the years like practiced hands pulling, pushing, kneading dough into a shape agreeable to her memory. She's been telling me she's 90, proudly, for the last 6 years. She asks again when she will get to eat bang, if I've met any good men, when she will have her cup of tea. I wonder if the truth would scald or soothe. I try to remember if she's 91 or 92. I think of the woman I love and I say, soon, Grandma, soon. Thank you. And I'm going to read a poem that is not in the book that I wrote before we moved, or as we were about to move to Midland from Toronto. I lived in cities my whole life, and going from Vancouver to Toronto to Midland was a bit of a change, to put it lightly. So this poem was kind of coming out of that situation. This one is called Road Trip. We watch our lives disappear in the rear window. The city, its veneer of smoke and mirrors, its reflection a promise that money is always closer than it appears. My hands slick on the wheel, nerves like dandelions about to fly, bearing the dream of making a new home somewhere else. Our dog whines, vomits on the seat, then falls asleep. We drive past motels and gas stations until we are 19 again, and all we see is sky. My lover teaches me how to recognize trees: birch, white, pine, cones, cedar, gijik. I bury my nose in the sweetness of peeling trunks and needled branches. Remember the softness of leaves and bark. The earth opening to me like a sunrise for the first time. Thank you. And this last one I wrote before the new year. Not this new year, the previous new year. I was anticipating that the pandemic would be over soon after that, which obviously didn't happen. So this is called The New Year. Like all beginnings, it held hope in a tight fist. This is the year you'll do that thing. So I say goodbye to the plants we couldn't keep alive, each dried up promise to do the dishes, take out the garbage, sweep the dust and hair. My hair is leaving me by the hundreds each day. It's not me, it's science. We lose almost enough hair each year to make a full wig. I am lucky my biggest inconvenience is my hair growing scientifically weary of me. I tell myself it is just another day to pet my dog, wake up next to the one I love. A new day to reconvene with my body, finally have time to say good morning to every unseen speck of dust. I wind my watch. It has seen 63 new years, which is to say, it knows every minute for what it is, a kindness. Thank you. And that is about 10 minutes. And I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you so much, Grace. There was so much wonderful in there, but you know, one of the things that stuck with me is how it reminded me about how I never came out to my grandma before she died. It like just couldn't happen. So now I'd like to welcome Rebecca Salazar to the stage. Rebecca is a writer, editor, and community organizer living on the unceded territory of the Wolstick. Salazar is the author of 2 chapbooks, and her first full-length collection, Sulphur Tongue, from McClelland and Stewart, was a finalist for the 2021 Governor General's Award for Poetry. And that's amazing. Congratulations on that, Rebecca. Can't wait to hear what you have to say today.
Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction, and to James and Grace for really beautiful poems to start off. I don't know if I've like laughed and felt so many things that much all month yet. It's been a weird time. So thank you. It's always a pleasure to have poetry remind you of what's good in the world, especially when there's so much bad. And I have to admit that I'm going to bring some of the bad. I am a downer in poetry, so I apologize for that. I'm going to start with a sort of a series of 4 short poems from my book. And then I'm going to read a last poem that's a new one from what might be my second manuscript if I ever decide to show anyone, because it is deeply depressing and I don't want to inflict it on anyone. So I'll test it out on you tonight, but it is one of the gentler ones, so bear with me. I'll start with one of the early poems in my book, though. I debated over reading this because I don't know if I should speak about war right now, or if I am just inserting myself into a conversation I shouldn't be part of. But my family is from Colombia. War has never really had any distinguishing beginning or end in some histories or some versions of it there. And it's really both like a disappointment and a shock, even though it's not surprising to watch the world descend into more wars, both literally in the sense of what's happening in Eastern Europe right now, as well as in Yemen, in Syria, everywhere else. but also what's being done to trans people and queer people in the States, where they're being fought on their right to exist in schools or even be acknowledged or talked about or recognized. So yeah, I'm gonna start with this one, which is based on a story I remember hearing a lot about one of my mother's ancestors in Bogota. And just a slight contact warning for obviously talking about war and brief mention of guns. Bogota, 1948. You and the sack of flour and the fitful scents of hot dust, blood, and eucalyptus leaves are all I know I come from. And it could be just a story that you hide under a dead man for 2 days, hearing the guns pass every hour on the street. And you watch the smudge of flour on the dead man's sleeve and are reminded of your wife, the floured imprints of her hands on her skirt as she is rolling out arepas like those days ago, when there was not enough to feed yourselves, your children, or this future in which I cobbled genealogies that falter in your line. There is no proof that when the streets fall dark and quiet, you shift the dead man's body from your back. You place your hand across his cheek to close his mouth, turn him away so you will never know his face. There is no record of the way your sack of flour exhales a fine white breath that lingers, coiling slowly in the flicker of a street lamp as you hoist it with your weight-stiff arms, nor of the way the days of shouldering a punctured body make the flour a weightless burden now to carry, heavy only with the scent of your own warmth and with the spent breeze of a human night. But the name of the street and the shape of the ditch where you've lain are the shapes of the slow, benign marks on my chest, and the name of the man you held close is a prayer in a language I've lost. There are other men face down, lining each street as you come home. You hear the guns call somewhere, and your front door opens hesitant, then blossoms like a wound. I am pressing your dark flowered hand when your family carries you in, shuts the door. When your children hear your voice again and rush to hold you, I dissolve against their arms. I'm going to move now to the shorter poems, and actually I might deviate from my original plan and try to find a love song or a love poem in here somewhere. I think there's one. It's actually just got the most obvious title. It's called Lovey Dovey, so that'll be the second one in these. I'll start with Soothsayer, and I'll read these back to back. Soothsayer. The Gothic boom, a dog's bark peels down wind and peels a layer from a maple sapling's skin. Sleep is a brush with which we scorn to sweep our loam-caked fingernails. Stop and smell the lichens. Breathe the factory fume-infused fug of the parched fire moss. I used to be an irritant, a braggart, but all of my overreactions were anaphylactic. On northern highways, keep a mourning dove above in case your windshield face plants in the fireweeds. Lovey-dovey. First memory, the sunrise seeps through press hands, salt smell and blood orange light. You're my Brooklyn jazz cellist, my barefoot dog-walking cartographer. When I pine for you, I burn perfumed with gum and resin. You would trek across town with your face peeling off, it's so cold, just to warm me. You are oversized, rose-tinted glasses. I ache only to love everything. Reasonable ground. With all our ups and downs, at what point does our inclination lead to our decline? For failed object permanence, please press 1. For jealousy, press 3. For polyamory, press any number gently. Let us drink. Let us pool in our cup palms, my sexual traumas, your chain smoke monogamies. I have been missing your voice like bleach bones dream of flesh. We are both anxious cancers just waiting to happen. Come, let's probe one another for overgrowths. I'm going to stop there and move to the new poem at this point. I am thinking a lot about the pandemic, as I constantly am. I have the privilege of being able to work from home in my new job, which is really helpful as someone with terrible immune system and high risk for complications from COVID, which is great fun now that my province and various other provinces have decided masks are no longer necessary, even though their scientists tell them the opposite. So myself and various other disabled friends are currently just DMing each other with our daily rage all the time. And there's a lot of grief built into that because we're scared and we're preparing to isolate like we never have before, even though that's been part of our lives for a long time, for longer than most people. And we're just hoping that like this mass disabling long COVID event that's happening won't be just like, we're hoping the people who catch long COVID because of all this won't have as bad an experience as we have with the medical system. So fingers crossed, prayers to every god, every deity, every power that you pray to. The poem I'm going to end with is about coming to terms with disability later in life, not immediately, not having been born with a disability that I know of, and kind of trying to relate that to trauma, both on a personal and like ecological scale, as I weirdly tend to do more than once in a lot of these poems. So I'll end with this one, content warning that it discusses briefly sexual assault, trauma generally, some mild body horror, and death. You may never be healthy again. There was before the grounded lightning and after. Viral vectors swirl the clouds, the landscape altered, atomized. Reach for them, Jack Pine Sentinel and sprawling lake, a shallow channel and blackwater deeps, rusted lily, reed and heron, scents of pine and swamp gas, clean water and murk. Engender spider weave to snare the memory. You may never see these again. No more homecomings for the healthless. Burn star anise, firewood, pine sap, deplete hoarded stores in divine isolation. Recall femme resilience, queer laughter, the trauma bonds that graft us at the cuts, the choice to keep on living, still dark water, jack pines groaning in the wind. Release the histories that bind new growth, brainwashing and abuse, sexual assault, immune suppression, mass pandemic, suicidal tendencies, ghost pregnancy, PTSD, false objectivity, new disability. Lay down the sting of omnipresent death threat and release the voices you will not embrace again. Spent lovers, carers who are too distant. I worry about you, little eye. Begin again the way new jack pines only grow after a wildfire, as ecotones reclaim abandoned malls, as mushrooms bloom at Fukushima. You writhe like pleasure after trauma, like the racked body deserves it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca. Beautiful, heart-wrenching, terrifying stuff. Beautiful. Brad Fraser is an award-winning writer, director, host who has worked extensively in various media. Credits include plays, Unidentified Human Remains and The True Nature of Love, Poor Superman, True Love Lies, Kill Me Now, and others produced worldwide. For film, Love and Human Remains, Leaving Metropolis, Queer as Folk, as the story editor and associate producer, and Jawbreaker when he hosted for 2 seasons on Out TV. He has written a number of projects for radio, for CBC and BBC, as well as regular columns and stories for Extra, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and others. He has been the recipient of a number of prestigious awards, twice listed in Tim Magazine's top 10 plays of the year. I think it's Tim Magazine, okay. Top 10 plays of the year, and has recently finished his master's degree in theater and performance studies at the University of Toronto. Brad's play Kill Me Now was nominated for a Governor General's Award in 2016 and is currently filming in South Korea, as well as being in development for a film in Canada. His memoir, All the Rage, has just been released by Penguin Random House. Brad, welcome. Take it away. And remember to put your mute off, Brad.
There we go. Sorry about that. I am the vulgarian breaking through the window on this one after all of that beautiful poetry. It's going to be a sort of change of pace. I'm going to read a segment from my memoir. And I should mention that I was recently nominated for an Audie Award in America for Best Writer Reading His Own Work among a very prestigious group of people, including Katie Couric and Barack Obama. Barack Obama won. If you can believe it, if you can believe it. So I'm just going to dive in here. It's not poetry. It's an adventure I had in the 80s. I've been doing this for about 45 years, so I need glasses to read. That autumn, Kate left town to do a show, and Tad sublet his place and moved in with me. One autumn night, after leaving the club with Richard, the three of us went for a bite at a nearby restaurant. Afterwards, we took a shortcut through the alley that ran next to the Odeon Theatre. By the time we were partway up the alley, we realized we were being followed by four men of about our age. We shared a quick look and quickened our step. Our pursuers did the same, saying they were going to take Tad's fleece-lined leather coat off of him. Tad said to them, "Come on, guys, we don't want any trouble." They laughed. We could hear them whispering, "Faggots, cocksuckers, why are you walking so fast? Scared?" We were terrified. We were also three guys who worked out, and they didn't look all that big. Just as we emerged from the alley across the street from the Hudson's Bay store, they rushed us. I could feel adrenaline flushing through my system. My father didn't teach me much in my childhood, but he did teach me how to put up a guard and throw a punch, and I started roaring insults at them in my most demonic voice. I blocked a couple of punches and slapped my attacker away just as I heard Tad call my name. Two of them were moving in on him. Richard was holding his own with his attacker, landing a few decent blows, so I punched one of Tad's assailants in the side of the head. He made a pained noise, and amazingly, they all took off. As we walked up Jasper Avenue, we were sky high with our victory, giddy and shaky. We dropped Richard off at his place and continued on to mine. As we passed under the dark shadow of the old train overpass that used to cross Jasper Avenue just west of 109th Street, we became aware of footsteps behind us. Our hearts sank. The whispering started again. The quartet was back, and now we were just two. Tad and I began to run. The hoods were hot on our heels. The only place open at that time of night was the match store up the block. We sprinted toward its bright lights. We flew into the store and straight to the counter where Tad asked the clerk, a gay guy we knew slightly from the bars, to call the cops just as our pursuers entered. The store was moderately busy, mostly with gay guys we'd just seen an hour earlier at the club. As soon as it became obvious what was going down, they all cleared out. I shared a look with Tad. He nodded and turned, grabbing the guy who was right behind him and pushing him to the back of the store. The guy and his friends were so surprised they didn't know what to do as Tad shoved their buddy into a tall Coke display that toppled, exploding sticky soda all over the floor. Tad's target slipped and fell. I grabbed the guy next to me and ran him to the door, smashing him into it so hard it opened. I'd meant to throw him out, but his buddy came up from behind me and pushed me out the door as well. Tad and the third guy followed us, and it became a free-for-all of hurled insults, punches, and kicks. We were holding our own, but trying to fend off four was getting very difficult. The likely bloodbath in which I would be crippled for life was curtailed by the appearance of the diminutive store clerk brandishing a baseball bat with a couple of nails in the end, screaming at the bashers to get the hell out of there because the cops were on their way. The sound of a siren convinced them, and they took off. Tad came to me and we sagged into one another's arms. All of the adrenaline vanished and we could barely stand. We leaned against the building, pulled out cigarettes and sucked on them desperately, thanking the clerk as a cop car with flashing lights pulled up. Tad had a split lip and a bruise on his cheek. I had no idea what I looked like, but I could feel the blood running from my nose over my lips and chin and before splashing onto the front of my coat. We finished our smokes and the cops put us in the back of the squad car where we recounted everything that had taken place after leaving the restaurant. They were a male and female cop, early 30s, I'd guess. The male cop said, "Where were you at before the restaurant?" Tad and I shared a look. This is the point every queer person had to deal with when reporting a bashing, the point where the cops will either turn out to be assholes, usual, or allies, rarely. After all, these were the people who hung around in the shadows of the flashback parking lot, targeting and busting gays in any way in a way they never would at a straight club. I said, flashback. The look they exchanged let us know these two would not be allies. The female cop said, "So you got into a fight?" I said, "There were 4 of them." The cop said, "Who won?" But sneered his shit attitude as I said, "Apparently you did." Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. "Apparently you did." Tad snickered, but the cops didn't get it. The male cop asked us if we wanted to ride home. In my mind, I said, "No, we want to walk just in case those assholes are still hanging around waiting for us again, you patronizing breeder fuck." Instead, I just nodded and gave them the address and they drove us there silently. I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but that's the story.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Brad. I mean, I'm sorry that you had to live that. I really love how much queer energy there is today. There's just so many of us here who have been through queer experience and are bringing that to the table tonight. I'm so pleased with it. So we're going to move on to questions now. Again, if you have them, please put them in the chat and we will we'll ask our wonderful readers them. But first, we'd like to ask, what does literary success look like to you? Like, Brad, you said like you lost to Obama. That that's a loss, but it feels like a win, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it felt like a total win to me. I mean, you know, to be nominated next to him, I mean, he's Googled my name, I'm pretty sure, right? So how many people get that, you know?
Anybody
Money.
else? Rebecca, what does literary success feel like to you?
That's a great question. I have no idea, coming from poetry, what the standard is for success. Yeah, it's hard to tell, but I think the moments that I look for really are when you really connect with someone who's read something. This is maybe a cheesy answer, but yeah, just that moment of like when someone really gets, like, especially the really queer references. I've had some really good conversations after reading. I have a poem about Trixie Mattel. And anyone who gets that reference immediately will just be like, yes, okay, let's talk. And like, they'll get both the silliness of the reference, but also like the gorier stuff that's happening in the poem. And it just like makes such a weird connection that like I never thought the poem would do, because it was just like me like scream channeling my bad feelings after a comedy show into a poem. And like the way that that turns into like connections with other queer people and other like survivors of violence at times, and like people who just share whatever experience you're putting into the poem, like that feels more successful than like the prizes and stuff that happen sometimes. And like I have complicated feelings about the prizes being like certain prizes being named for like representatives of the monarchy and things like that. I think that's all I can really say out loud, but yeah, it's more like the connection. And also I won't lie, like register for PLR. I just got my PLR check like this week and that was pretty fantastic. Yeah, libraries are fantastic. So
Yeah, so for people who don't know, PLR is the money that you get from your books being taken out from the library. So if you don't have like money to buy books and you take them out from the library, you're still supporting writers. It's a good thing to do. Yeah. Oh, actually, we have a couple more questions. So maybe we'll skip, what does the literary success look like for you? Because Grace, James, and Rebecca, family came into your poetry today. And Brad, you're writing candid nonfiction. Is there anything you worry about or take into account when writing publicly about the people around you?
Yes.
Let's start with Grace.
Yeah, that's always been a sticking point for me because I'm not out to everyone in my family, but a lot of my poetry is really gay. So there's always that kind of nagging little voice in the back of my head, like, oh, what if they randomly Google something or something comes up? And yeah, I mean, actually this past summer, my grandma actually passed away and I went home to visit family. And one of my aunts, who I'm actually very close with, she pulled me aside, and it was literally like that nightmare come to life. She was like, hey, did you write a book? And then I was like, oh my God. And I was internally having a meltdown. But she was actually really cool with it. So I kind of got forced out of the closet with her. But that ended up being a good experience because she's one of my favorite aunts. And if I was going to come out to anyone in the family, she would have been the first one. So that being said, it's always in the back of my mind. And now I feel like having a collection out and that being more accessible and findable online is more of a thing because I have cousins. I'm out to most of my cousins, but still I don't know. I think when I've felt the need to write something, so in the collection, it's been very kind of family oriented because I was processing a lot of things. Having done that, I do feel less of a need to do it now. But I think with poetry, you can't really push that aside or avoid it. If you need to write a poem, you need to write a poem. It's gonna come out of you one way or another. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would
James,
say.
what about you? Oh, yeah, Brad.
I would say because I was writing autobiographically, that was something I thought about constantly. Was what is my responsibility to other people, and particularly the prologue to my book, which is about my family and which is about growing up in a background of abuse of almost every kind you can think of. That when you disclose those kind of things, they like coming out, it affects other people around you. I remember when I came out publicly in my late teens, all my gay friends who were not out said, what the hell are you doing? Our parents know you're our friend. They're going to know we're gay too. And I had the same issue with my siblings. How do I talk about what happened to me and not talk about what happened to you? I mean, is it fair to do that? So I just left them out of the book and made a disclaimer in there. But I also was lucky to a certain degree in a really dark way, which is my book is also an AIDS memoir. It's all set entirely during the AIDS crisis. And a lot of the people that I'm writing about very candidly, like Tad and various other friends in the book, are dead and have been dead for 10 to 15 years. But my best friend, who also plays a big part in the book, works internationally in places like Russia and Dubai and Saudi Arabia and things like that. So he couldn't even have his name in the book, his actual name, and be related to a publicly out queer person, because that could actually put him in a position of danger when he's in these other places. So it was a real juggling act that, and also I don't believe in asking permission to write things. I think it's very dangerous for artists to start asking permission to tell particular stories and that kind of thing. So it was that constant tightrope walk between being honest, but also not hurting or putting anyone else into danger any more than you had to speak the truth.
That's incredible. That's such a perspective. Like the actual physical safety of your friends. Yeah. James, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I am a raging ball of anxiety at all times throughout the day. So I am constantly thinking about how the words that I'm writing when it's involving other people, how it would affect them. And generally speaking, if I feel that little tingly sensation in the back of my neck, like this isn't either the person's too young or it's someone who can't really give consent. I don't necessarily always like if it's like more of a lighthearted poem, I don't necessarily have to run each one of those by, but I still ask myself that question. Like if I ask, do I feel comfortable asking this person to publish this poem or to put this out into the world? And if the answer is no, and I can't find workarounds, either, changing the location, changing the setting, changing the age, if I can't find a way of changing those aspects, it doesn't work, then it's a poem for me. And that's sometimes all it has to be.
Rebecca?
Yeah, there's always a version of my poems that's just for me. Especially with some of the newer stuff that I'm writing, like I have to be very careful what I share of it and how, for multiple reasons, both because it would endanger other people and also because like there's like weird legal repercussions to saying what happened to me that I'm writing about. And that's unpleasant. If you want to read about slap legislation, go read about that. It's painful and infuriating. But I think especially with the family stuff and with anytime I'm concerned about writing someone else's story, even as it relates to mine, I just kind of have this tendency to fictionalize in the version that other people get to see. So I start like adding details or maybe like mashing two different stories together or creating like composite characters and things like that. So like my rule is that it like always has to be entirely true, even if it's far from accurate. So like as long as it's true to what happened and the emotions and the situation that was happening, it doesn't have to be identifiable, and there can be like details that I brought in from another event and things like that, especially for the visuals and kind of that sort of reference. I think it's a way of kind of like adding sort of like a dream likeness and making it easier to present, especially when I'm like reading poems out loud. Like if it's about something horrible and like difficult to talk about, that's also difficult for people other than me. Like I want there to be a layer of fantasy, or like we were talking about science fiction, a layer of like something comfortable to kind of buffer that and like provide some safety, as well as like making it an enjoyable thing to read, hopefully.
Thank you so much. We do have one more question if we can fit it in before the end, which is, we have a couple of actually. You've talked about, all of you, I think, have talked about some darker subjects as well as some more tender subjects. And how do you find that balance? And do you find it tipping, especially during this pandemic? Who wants to take it up?
I will jump in. My writing, I always feel, and a lot of it has to do with being a dramatist rather than a poet or a prose writer. This is my first prose attempt with this memoir, that I always have to have a balance between the dark and the light, because when I go dark, I go really dark. So when I want to go light, I have to go equally humorous. And I find that the way you keep an audience is by sort of walking that line between making them laugh and making them cry, and sometimes giving them no choice in how that's going to happen, or making those two things happen simultaneously is for me the greatest power I have as a writer. and that's what I do. So, I don't like things that are relentlessly bleak, and I don't like things that are relentlessly kind of stupid either. I like things that kind of use all of those possibilities in the writing. So for me, it's always a mixture of the two. And every once in a while, I'll run into someone a young director or something, who'll go, "Oh, I love your play, but you know what? I'm gonna try to do it so that nobody laughs. So it's always serious all the way through." And I always am sort of like, yeah, that's a really stupid idea, because it throws that balance that I've worked so hard on off. So that's my opinion on the subject.
Like how Stanislavski ruined Chekhov. Sorry, this is my perspective. don't repeat that at home if you have, does anybody else have a perspective on that? Grace or Rebecca or James?
That's a really interesting question, because I've never really thought about like a particular tone to poems. It's usually the subject that kind of is the jumping off point when I write something, as opposed, and the tone comes out depending on the subject. Maybe I'm just not a funny person, because I feel like a lot of my poems are are more serious, but I think every poet approaches their kind of practice differently. Like for me, for example, I write because growing up, I never really talked that much about feelings with family or with friends, and it's always been a way for me to process like feelings and things that happen in childhood and kind of growing out of that, which for some people might lean toward the darker side, for some people might lean toward a more sunny disposition if they're lucky. So I think it depends a lot. I think out of all the poems I've written, maybe 10 to 15% are funny. And that's me thinking it's funny. I don't know if it's funny for other people, but I think it's kind of funny. But yeah, I'd be really interested to see what other people think here, because for me, that's I've never thought about it in that way before.
Rebecca, you've got bodies like flour sacks. That's pretty dark. But you lean into the love, into the tender sometimes, into the lighter aspects of things.
Yeah, I think a lot of that happens accidentally for me, and then I end up bringing it out in editing or when someone points it out to me. I write a lot of puns, and like this is both a shameless thing and also like I find puns fascinating because they can like they're literally stacking meaning on top of meaning, and sometimes it's hilarious and sometimes it's just so awful. And I think that's something powerful that I keep like going back to. So yeah, like a lot of the stuff that I'm writing about darker or more traumatic stuff is like a lot of what I'm writing right now comes out of like having PTSD and having horrible flashbacks and nightmares in inconvenient places, and the weird time travel that comes with that. And it's hard to write that in a way, like I feel like I'm running out of good things to write about or nice poems to read to people, because I'm still stuck in that writing phase. Stuck is the wrong word, but like it's hard to find the levity except when it gets so absurd. So I just like leaning to making a pun about a really horrible experience, as like a coping strategy, and it kind of turns into for me like like I call it survivor laughter a lot of the time with a couple of my friends who also write about horrible things and make jokes about it. There's a sort of like point where things are so bad where you just have to laugh because the alternative is you die. And the laugh keeps you going. Like it reminds you like, oh yeah, I'm still here. I can still like laugh in spite of it, or laugh because it's so ridiculous, or laugh because that connects me to other people who are laughing about things they shouldn't be laughing at. And there's a weird connection there that like I think that's what I go back to. And also just I love splitting a pun over a line ending. I'm just gonna go with that as the last thing I say here. It's really fun to just like drop that in on someone who's reading it. I enjoy it for like silly, mischievous reasons, as well as like the deeper stuff about how you can play with meaning. Yeah, it's like the world's worst and oldest and most powerful kind of joke.
I love a good pun. I'm the dad joke person in my family. With two moms, so yeah, I'm the dad joke. James, final word on this?
Yeah, I mean, most of my writing tends to revolve around trauma, addiction, and family death. So very cheery stuff, obviously. But I find that coming from like a music background, something I'm always interested in is dynamics. And so like where the different parts of a poem or a song fit within the whole. And so I find I don't enjoy it when things are always kept on the same level for my own writing. So I like playing with that duality of, yeah, cool. That 6-month period of terrible times in my life, but also fart jokes. It makes for a fun duality. And I think for me, there's a lot of this processing those experiences. I feel like I feel I have control over them. I've taken power back when I can be jovial about them, when I can joke about them, and the thought of them doesn't just send me spiraling. So I think it's partially therapeutic, partially terrible attention span.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for reading with us today. I just love when you program all these people and you throw them together and you've got poetry and you've got memoir, and then there becomes these beautiful synergies like we saw today, where it is about queerness and violence and all of these things. Yeah. So thank you again, and thank you to all of the audience who is with us here today. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and remember to throw us some money if you can. Our next Brockton Writers Series is going to be on May 11th. Oh, Brad's showing his book. There's the book. Yeah, everybody show your books if you can. And please do buy their books, follow them on social media, buy their books, and give them money, take their books out from the library if you can't afford to buy a book, and support these wonderful writers. And you can support us by coming to our next event on May 11th, 2022. Mark your calendars. Keep an eye on our social medias for the announcements. In May, we'll hear readings by H. Nigel Thomas, Kasma Adami, Victoria Mbazi, Gavin Barrett, and we'll hear about social media best practices for writers with Carolyn Suzuki from ECW Press. See you there. Thank you, everybody, Brockton Writers, readers, listeners, and supporters.